It's January 2nd, 1932, and a crowd gathers at a small farmhouse in Brookline near Republic, Missouri. It's dark, and people are so terrified to approach the house that there is talk of using airplanes to bomb the farmhouse. People speculate about how many snipers might be in the house. They had just killed 6 police officers and wounded several more. This is Madame Morbid. I am your guide on any number of historical adventures. And today, we are going to talk about the Young Brothers Massacre. This is part 3 of a series on this event. Be sure to watch parts 1 and parts 2. Episode 1 is about the Young Brothers, their history growing up, how they got into crime, and what they were wanted for. Episode 2 is all about the police officers. There are biographies of every single one of them. It's important to watch this so you understand all of these people and how this event occurred. Why is this topic important? It had a huge effect on how police work was done in this country. Policing was probably at its most dangerous in this time period. And what was learned from this event helped the police figure out ways to protect themselves, to actually train officers, to have it be more of a professional job that required skills and strategy. Lots of mistakes are made here, mistakes that needed to be learned from. I want to give you an idea of what 1931, the year leading up to this, was like. Herbert Hoover is president, and Charles Curtis is vice president, and the population of the United States is 124,039,648. The world population is 4.378 billion. The unemployment rate is 16.3. A first-class stamp costs 2 cents. Al Capone is arrested and given 11 years in federal prison for tax evasion. The Scottsboro boys are arrested and their trial begins in Alabama, showing us the depth of racism during this time period. The Star-Spangled Banner is adopted as the national anthem of the United States. The St. Louis Cardinals won the World Series against Philadelphia 4-3. Montreal won the Stanley Cup, and 20 grand won the Kentucky Derby. The Empire State Building was completed, and Georgia O'Keeffe painted Cow Skull. The Academy Award for Best Picture was Cimarron. And in Springfield, Missouri, Greene County Sheriff Marcel Hendricks continued his search for Harry Young, who was responsible for the murder of Republic, Missouri Deputy Mark Noe. Marcel Hendricks was actually a really good sheriff. And that's interesting because he literally had not served in law enforcement at all before becoming sheriff. In his 3 years in office, Marcel Hendricks had caught every suspect he ever went after, except one, and that was the killer of Mark Noe. And it really bothered him that he had not caught Harry Young. And he was following leads. He got a lead one time that Harry might be in St. Louis. He went there. He worked with St. Louis law enforcement to try to track him down. They offered their help, and he said, "No, that's not necessary. Harry won't hurt me." He had known Harry since he was a little boy. And the biggest flaw Marcel Hendricks had was being completely incapable of recognizing Harry for what he had become. He could not separate that little boy he had known from the cold-blooded murderer he had become. And he just couldn't believe that Harry would hurt them. Sometime in 1931, a lawyer from Tulsa showed up in Springfield, Missouri to talk to Sheriff Hendricks. He said he had a client who had been accused of car theft, but he swore up and down that he had purchased this car in good faith from a guy named Hi Young. They thought this was Harry. The sheriff thought so too. And as a way to throw Harry off, he started spreading the word that the heat was off on Harry. They weren't interested in him anymore. He thought he was probably in Mexico. He was just going to stop looking for him. He thought this might draw Harry back to town, maybe to visit his family. And that is exactly what happened. December 30th. Harry and Jennings arrived home around 11 p.m. and drove down this very driveway. Their car was, of course, stolen. About 30 minutes after them, their sister Lorena and her husband, Albert Conley, arrived from Houston as well. Albert swore this was an absolute coincidence. He didn't know a whole lot about Harry's crimes. He knew he'd been in trouble with the law, but he didn't know particulars, and he says he really didn't want to know. If he had known they were going to be there, he said he would have gone to his mother's first. He was coming to Springfield to find a job because he had recently lost his in Houston. Well, the next morning, the boys get up, they shave, and they try to ditch this stolen car. They show up at Baldwin Motors, and they suggest, how about we trade this 1931 Ford sedan for a new Model A? Baldwin was suspicious. He said he didn't trust their quote-unquote references, so he turned them down flat. They went home empty-handed, but tried again. This time they got their sister Lorena involved. They sent her with this same 1931 Ford to Medley Motor Company at 452 East McDaniel in Springfield. Jennings and his sister Venita followed them in another car and parked a block away so she would have a ride home. Medley offered Lorena $250 for the car, but the car was titled in the name of J.P. Young of Brookline. If she was going to sell this car, her name needed to be on the title. So he said, take this, have J.P. Young sign it over to you, and then bring it back, and I'll see what I can do. The thing is, anything with the name Young on it from Brookline was a big red flag to any car dealership in Springfield or the surrounding area. Clyde Medley knew exactly what was going on here, but on that Thursday, he did not pick up the phone and call the police. And it could be because he knew the Young family was really bad news and he was scared. He may have just hoped she would leave and not come back. Unfortunately for Clyde Medley, she absolutely came in the next day with the paperwork he had requested. He was probably thinking, dang it. He had to put her off some more. So he said, look, it's New Year's Day. The banks are closed and I don't have enough cash to give you $250. Can you come back tomorrow? I imagine she was pretty annoyed, but she said, okay. She turned around and left. As soon as she walked out that door, he picked up the phone and called the police. January 2nd for the Young family started with a family outing. Willie took her daughters, Venita, Natalie, and Lorena to town, and they visited a friend, Etta Smith. She lived about a block south of the town square. Albert Connolly went along, but he went and got his hair cut, and the ladies mostly spent the day visiting. Around noon, Albert Conley drove his mother-in-law here to the town square to do some shopping. The building behind me, which is now Park Central Square Library Branch of the Springfield Greene County Library, was Kresge's Five and Dime General Store. And this is where Albert Conley dropped Ma Young off on January 2nd, 1932 to do her shopping. After leaving here, Albert drove them back to the farmhouse. They weren't there for very long. They were there long enough to talk to Harry. Oscar was there with his wife, Madge, and their kids. Oscar and his family left around 1:30. But they talked to Harry for a little bit. They got the title to the car. They picked up the car they wanted to sell. They didn't see Jennings, but Oscar and Jennings didn't like each other, so Jennings was probably hiding upstairs, so he didn't have to see his brother that he didn't like. Lorena says they specifically went to the farm to get the title to the car. They also wanted to hide all of this from Ma. They didn't want Ma to know they had this hot car that they were trying to sell. Well, unfortunately for Lorena and Venita, when they get to Medley Motors, there are two police officers waiting for them there. Ma Young had a long history with anxiety. She had had a nervous breakdown a few years before, and every time Harry came to visit, it would get so much worse. She loved him. He was her son. But in her heart, I think she knew it was just a matter of time before the police closed in. And when her girls didn't come to get her, she knew exactly what was happening. Some people allege that when she got back to Etta's house, she called and warned her boys that the police were coming, they've got your sister. But journalist J.R. Woodside determined no call was made to the house. Also during this time, there were party lines. If she had made that call, neighbors would have heard it. But by the time everything was over and the police found Ma at Etta's house, she was in absolute hysterics. And word had trickled back to town of what had happened at her farmhouse by that time. Let's get back to Lorena and Venita and what's happening to them. These two officers take them back to police headquarters. It's 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon, and Tony Oliver sits them down and is interrogating them. Where are your brothers? Don't know. Where'd you get the car? Brother Paul brought it up from Texas last week, but he turned right around and went back. It's stolen? Who would have guessed? Harry? Haven't seen him in the longest time. Hard telling where he might be. Not at the farm, that's for sure. Well, this is Market and College. So the police station was said to have been at this corner. Once Tony Oliver was done questioning the sisters, he came out and he said, I know where Harry and Jennings Young are. And they started gathering the posse. Sheriff Hendricks was called. He was going to be in charge because it was his turf. He and Wiley Mashburn got together and went over to Ollie Crosswhite's house to pick him up. He had just sat down to a nice dinner of ham and beans, one of his favorites, according to Ethel, when they knocked on the door. He didn't even get to take a bite, and Ethel was always very sad that he didn't even get to have that meal. She said she was scared, and she actually said to him, I'm afraid you'll get killed. And he said, don't worry, I won't. And he left. Here with Frank Pike, he features very prominently in our story. And his testimony is one of the reasons we know what happened. He survived Virgil Johnson and Owen Brown and Ben Blue. So we have all of their testimony. Frank was pretty open about what he experienced and saw. Owen Brown didn't like to talk about it at all. His son actually said he couldn't provide any information because his father never told him anything. All we have is anything he said at the coroner inquest, and everything that follows is coming from that. The posse assembled at the police station at the corner of College Street and Market. They took Route 66 to Hazeltine Road. Right now you are seeing the exact route they took from College and Market to the location. They were in two cars. The lead car was driven by Sheriff Marcel Hendricks. In the front seat with him was Deputy Wiley Mashburn and passengers Ollie Crosswhite and detectives Sid Meadows and Virgil Johnson. Officer Charlie Hauser drove the second car. With him was Detective Tony Oliver and Ben Blue. As they drove down Highway 66, it would have been getting dark. Officially, the sun would set that day at 5:03 p.m. 5 miles west of Springfield, they crossed the railroad tracks. They then turned left on a paved road running north to south, which ran through 16,000 acres of orchards. When the orchards stopped and fields began, they pulled over to the side of the road and climbed out. Hendricks and Oliver walked up to the right of the automobiles. They were a quarter mile to the east of the Young farm. From where they were, they could not see the house for the barn. Their primary concern at this point is cutting off possible escape routes for the brothers. Hendricks decides to split their forces. Oliver, Hauser, and Blue took an unpaved road. It was more of a rutted path than anything, through the orchard and would stop just north of the farmhouse. They would walk out of the orchard across a pasture where they would rendezvous with Hendricks. The sheriff's group would go along Hazeltine Road, turning right. Sheriff Hendricks drove his car down this long driveway to the farmhouse. In 1932, the house was white. It was surrounded by a wire fence. Hendricks pulled up and parked by this fence, with the car facing the house. His was the only car parked there. The house was totally quiet, and only smoke coming from the chimney presented any evidence that there might be somebody inside. The two teams meet in the front yard, and then another group of reinforcements that they hadn't asked for arrives. This is Frank Pike and Owen Brown. They just came of their own volition. With them, weirdly, was a Springfield jeweler, R.E. Wegman. Did he just want to watch? He at least didn't get out of the car. But why they let him come, I don't know. I guess that's just another piece of evidence of how little they had concern about this. So now there are two police cars parked in front of the house, and Oliver's car was still in the orchard. Because there were no other cars around, the guys may have assumed there was simply nobody home. Detective Frank Pike described what happened next. Quote, "Well, we all walked kind of up in front of the house, and the sheriff tried the front door. The door was locked. Detective Johnson said they got out of the car, and it looked like nobody was home. But he could see inside that there was a fire burning in the fireplace. Johnson said they went up to the front door, kicked at it a few times, yelled at whoever might be inside to come outside. Nobody replied. Ollie Crosswhite said he thought he heard somebody walking around in there. Owen Brown said when they pulled up, they could see all of the guys milling about in the front yard, talking. As they got out, he said Wiley Mashburn yelled to him, 'Hey, any of you guys got a skeleton key on you?' He said then he saw Charlie Hauser give Mashburn a skeleton key to try to open the door with. One piece of equipment they did have with them was a tear gas gun. There's speculation it might have been a police club gas gun made by Federal Laboratories of Pittsburgh. Their literature described it as having, quote, "The solid brass barrel is covered with high-grade leather washers, which are machined and polished to the shape of the club. The gun holds one large gas shell and is easily reloaded. Strong leather thong is attached and gun has excellent safety device. Cartridges contain enough gas to disperse small mob outdoors. The gas produces temporary blindness, but is harmless." Virgil had never used the gun before, but he took it, shot it into the upper story, breaking the window, and hitting his mark perfectly. Johnson said, quote, "I shot in the house with the gas and told them it would take a few minutes for the gas to take effect and to wait a little bit and they would come out if they were in there." Unfortunately, either they didn't wait long enough or the gas was ineffective. Hendricks seemed pretty anxious to get on with it. Virgil Johnson again cautioned him to wait for the gas to take effect before they busted into the house. Hendricks replied, "It'll be working all right by the time we get upstairs. Come on, Wiley, let's you and I go to the back door. Johnson, you better come along. Bring another shell. We may want one in the rear if we hear 'em in a room or a closet." Hendricks told the rest of the guys to surround the house, so if anybody got out, they could intercept them. Ollie Crosswhite and Owen Brown positioned themselves at the northeast corner of the house. This room is an addition. It was not there at the time. And the door Hendricks and Mashburn go to and kick in would be located inside this room. Sheriff Hendricks, Wiley, and Virgil Johnson walked around the side of the house to the kitchen door. Virgil tried to unlock the door with the skeleton key, but there was a key in the lock already on the inside of the door, so he couldn't get the key in. At that point, they started running to the door and hitting it with their shoulders. They slammed their shoulders into the door 3 times before it burst open. Virgil Johnson, Ben Blue, and Frank Pike all witnessed what happened to the sheriff and the deputy. The door opened about halfway, and as Wiley stepped up onto the step to enter the house, there was a report from inside. Instantly, the left side of Wiley's face took it all, and he fell back, kind of landed on his rump. About 3 seconds later, a second report. This went right into Sheriff Hendricks's chest. He fell outside the house and just laid there. Virgil said there were at least 2 or 3 more. Virgil and Frank were both wounded. Virgil in the ankle and Frank in the arm. Neighbor Adeline Myers reported hearing these sounds around 4 o'clock. Virgil Johnson and Frank Pike ran for their lives to the front of the house. As he came around the corner, Frank hollered, "They've got both the sheriffs!" He said he could see Tony Oliver sheltering behind a tree near Sheriff Hendricks's car. He said there were about 3 trees in a row there. So these trees were just barely a little taller and a little wider than the men hiding behind them. And I read that they were pretty much all cut down and gone. But looking at this drawing with a comparison of the house now, it looks to me like some of the trees are still there. Not all of them. From where he stood, Owen Brown could not see what was happening at all, but Tony Oliver could. Owen Brown said, quote, "I heard 3 shots in rapid succession." And then Mr. Oliver says, "They have got them." And I said, "Who do you mean?" And he said, "They have got Mashburn and Hendricks." Frank Pike continued, "I got behind a tree and Sid Meadows jumped behind a tree just north of me. Ollie Crosswhite was kneeling down on his knees out on the northeast side of the house. That is the last I seen of Ollie Crosswhite because he went on around the house." Virgil Johnson said as he ran around the front of the house, he shot the gas gun again, but this time the shell hit the side of the house and did no good at all. He describes how all of the guys in the front were taking shelter behind trees. He said he saw Ollie Crosswhite standing with his back up against the wall there in that northeast corner of the house. Johnson saw that Crosswhite had a hand grenade. He saw him throw it through the window. What that was a little gas grenade, but it had no effect. After throwing that, Ollie ran toward the back of the house. Johnson heard somebody, possibly Tony Oliver, yell that they needed more guns and ammunition and they should get help. So Virgil turned and ran for the car that Frank Pike had brought. As he was running toward the car, Virgil Johnson said he was under assault the whole way. And after he got to the car and turned around, he said he could see a man in the house at the south window. He could see him raise his weapon, but he never raised it until he was ready to make that baby talk. These front 2 windows are the ones he's talking about. Just inside the room, behind this window, is a piano that JD bought for the parlor when they lived in Oklahoma. It's thought that Jennings was using this for cover. He would snipe and then tuck himself behind the piano before coming out and doing it again. As he got behind the wheel and started the engine, the windshield exploded. Pretty much all the glass was gone out of it. A small projectile hit it and cracked it, and then birdshot came in after that and cleared out all the glass. Ben Blue dove into the car, and Virgil remembered there was somebody else, but he wasn't sure who it was. But that was actually R.E. Wegman, the jeweler, who never should have come along in the first place. Virgil just kept going. He backed out and went to town for help. He said when he left, nobody was seriously hurt except Sheriff Hendricks and Deputy Mashburn. After Johnson left, Jennings stood at the window and one by one took down the officers. Owen Brown reported One of the strategies Jennings used was allowing them to peek out from around the tree and do nothing. And then the next time they did it, he took them down. He was an absolutely phenomenal shot. Owen Brown took shelter behind a tree at the northeast corner of the house. He said he hadn't hardly got behind the tree when he saw Charlie Hauser fall. He corroborated Johnson's account that they were shooting through the glass. He said when he saw the fatal shot, he said he saw part of the lace curtain float out through the broken glass. Charlie Hauser's injury was right in the middle of his forehead. Brown said, quote, "I decided I would get out in the front where I might do some good. I climbed over a fence back of me and went across this garden and come back in behind Mr. Meadows. Behind a tree right back of him, he says, 'You will get yourself killed.' He cautioned me about running around out there in plain sight. Just then another shot was fired and Tony hollered and said, 'They have got Crosswhite.'" What Tony probably saw was as Ollie Crosswhite was running through the backyard toward the cellar, his hat was shot off of his head, but it did not hurt him. And he may have fallen when this happened, either tripped or dove to the ground to protect himself. And when Tony saw this, he thought Ollie had been either hurt or killed. But that is not how he died. Ollie likely was able to get back up and get behind the cellar where he took refuge. Frank Pike described the sound as, quote, "In the house, the rifles was making a popping sound when they shot, more like a cap pistol than anything I know of. When somebody hollered that Crosswhite was shot, Tony Oliver hollowed out, 'They are going to kill us all.' Tony was only a few feet from me there then. All of us was shooting. Shots was firing all around us all the time. I was there a little while longer and Tony hollowed that, he says, quote, 'They have got me.' And right then, someone hollowed, I think it was Sid Meadows, he hollowed that Crosswhite was shot. Sid was standing behind a tree sideways. They shot him and he fell." Just like Charlie Hauser, Sid Meadows' wound was in the middle of his forehead. Tony Oliver was being showered with wood shards because the tree he was hiding behind was being repeatedly hit by Harry's shotgun. It's likely that he backed up to protect his face and body from this flying wood, which left him open to getting hit. Initially, he was hit in the shoulder, and he is said to have bravely emptied his rifle, and when that was empty, he threw it aside, he pulled out his revolver, and then he emptied that into the house. Frank said that Oliver turned to him and said, "You better run for it. They're going to kill us all." I could see he was pretty well gone. He was staggering. I said, "Tony, get behind that car." Owen Brown said that after his guns were empty, Tony Oliver turned toward the car, and as he was staggering towards it, he got hit again. He just kept saying, "I'm hit, I'm hit." Brown said he walked around beside the car and his knees began to wobble. He fell to his knees once, then got back up, walked a few more steps, and then fell flat. As Tony Oliver lay dying, someone inside the house yelled out, "Lay down your guns and come up. We've killed the others." Frank said, "Go to hell, you dirty skunk. We ain't laying down nothing." Owen Brown added, "Me too, you lousy dogs. Come out and fight like men." But then, in private, they turned to each other, and Frank asked him, "What do we do, Owen? We're out of lead, Frank. We'd better get. Let's run for that gate and reach the road to bring up the other men." And that's what they did. I suspect Jennings let Owen Brown and Frank Pike live. I think if he had wanted to, he absolutely would have had no problem hitting his target. He was just that good of a shot. But they were on foot, they were leaving, and because they were on foot, it was going to be a little bit before they could get help anyway. But there was one threat left and that was Ollie Crosswhite hiding behind the cellar in the backyard. At some point in all of this, the Young brothers barricaded themselves in the kitchen. They pulled Marcel Hendricks inside with them. Exactly why, I'm not sure. I suspect maybe he was blocking the door and it was safer to pull him inside rather than expose themselves and push him out. They closed the door and they barricaded it. They took a pole and wedged it against the kitchen table. The kitchen table was braced against the back wall. The middle of the pole was supported by a wooden chair, and then the pole was put against the door to keep anybody from coming in. You can clearly see a doorknob here. I think this is part of the door that broke off when the lawmen barged in, and they used that to secure the door. There's also a little bit of a mystery as to exactly what happened to Ollie and how. Ollie's attacker was standing right behind him, and the weapon was within 2 feet of his head. There are several theories. One is that when Ollie fell, he got knocked out and was incapacitated. One of the local papers suggested maybe they killed Ollie as they were evacuating the house. But that kind of assumes that Ollie was back there not doing anything while his compatriots were being attacked. That is not like Ollie at all. The third option, and the one that most seem to favor, is that Jennings got up in the kitchen window and was keeping Ollie busy by firing with his rifle. And as he did this, Harry snuck around, flanked Ollie, and took him completely unawares. So we don't technically know for sure, but those are a few of the options of what might have happened to Ollie Crosswhite. The Young brothers had a history with Ollie, and I suspect his death was personal. As I said in episode 2, Wiley Mashburn and Ollie Crosswhite liked to rough up prisoners, and there's a very high likelihood that the Young brothers had suffered under their treatment. I mentioned in episode 1 that Ma Young had personally gone to Ollie Crosswhite and asked him to intervene and try to get Harry away from one of his friends that she believed was a bad influence. I don't know specifically what happened with that situation, but clearly she had a relationship with Ollie as a law officer who she trusted to approach with issues she was having with her sons. I think what was done to Ollie Crosswhite may have been personal. With everybody dead, it was time to make their escape. Harry and Jennings wandered out into the yard. They yanked the spark plug wires from the sheriff's car. They grabbed Chief Oliver's gun. It's possible Oliver was still alive. His death was not quick. They went to Charlie Hauser, took his gun, then went back to the house. For some reason, they decided not to take Oliver's gun and dropped it next to Wiley Mashburn. They took Mashburn's gun instead. They took Ollie Crosswhite's pearl-handled revolver, went back into the house, took Sheriff Hendricks's gun. They took his wallet from his pocket. He had several $100s in there. He had checks, he had gold pieces. They emptied it all. But assuming that the gold pieces were pennies, they left them behind and threw the empty wallet and the gold pieces in the stove. Hurriedly packed a few things, the stolen guns, and the rifle and the shotgun they had used in the shootout, took some ammunition and 2 traveling bags. They took off on foot across orchards, cornfields, to find a car somewhere and steal it. After they were gone, Wiley Mashburn regained consciousness. The upper left side of his face was essentially no more. He was blind, but his mouth and jaw were fine. He probably called out to his comrades. He had no idea what had happened to anybody. He'd been unconscious for all of it, and I cannot imagine the fear. Being blind and alone and not knowing if the bad guys were still there, he sat up, and when he was found, he was basically rocking back and forth, feeling around in the area where his eyes should be. But he would not get help for quite some time, because his rescuers were at first too afraid to approach the house. After leaving the farmhouse, Virgil Johnson flew down the roads, weaving in and out of traffic, racing over the railroad tracks to town, back to the police station. He burst through the doors and said, "We want more men and guns. They've killed the sheriff and some more at Young's." Ben Blue and R.G. Wegman jumped out of the car. They ran inside to get more guns, and as they were gathering all of this stuff, others started to join them. Virgil got some more gas shells for the gas gun, and within seconds, he was back inside the car saying, "Let's go, let's go." Detective Ben Blue, Lee Jones, Sidney Kemp, and motorcycle officer Cecil McBride got in the car with him, and they headed off. Detective Grover White, Roscoe Daler, who was a deputy constable, and Officer Lester Scott got on his motorcycle. Otto Hendrick was an automobile dealer. He heard the cry, and he ran for his car. His friend Van Hook got in the car with him, and they headed off too. Motorcycle officer Wade Phillips got in his sedan with Sam Herrick Jr., also a car dealer, and Lon Scott, former secretary of the U.S. Route 66 Association. I mean, these guys were just passing by. Said, well, okay, we'll help too. And this procession headed toward the farmhouse. On their way there, they ran into Frank Pike and Owen Brown walking down Hazeltine Road. They pulled over, and they all gathered in front of them and asked them what had happened. "How many were killed?" they asked Brown. He said, "Hendricks, Mashburn, Hauser, Meadows, and Oliver, and probably Crosswhite." Someone asked in disbelief, "Brown? Are they really dead?" "Hell yes," he said. "I don't know about Crosswhite. We all heard shooting behind, and Tony said he was killed, but I didn't see it, so I don't know. But I guess he is, 'cause there ain't been any shooting since we reached the road." "Who did all this shooting?" somebody asked. "Hell, I don't know. None of us saw anybody in the house, but the way bullets come flying out, I bet the house is full of people. And boy, they can shoot. And ain't nobody left that place but us." Someone asked, "Are you sure they didn't drive away in a car?" Brown said, "They ain't been a soul move out in the yard anywhere in a car or anything else since we got out here. And brother, let me tell you something. We got here as fast as you could shoot a bullet from the house. Whoever killed the boys is still up there, either in the house or in the barn. I know damn well they're there someplace. They'll kill the first man that goes up now." Somebody said, "Well, boys, what do we do now?" They really did all they could do. They went right here to the driveway to decide their next move. And I'm going to continue our story with the rescue in the next episode. As you can see, there were a lot of mistakes made here. And in the aftermath of this, most of the blame was placed on county and city officials for letting the guys go on this raid so ill prepared for it. But we will talk later about ways they decided to change how they approached events like this to make better preparations and be more safe. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you'd like to support the channel, please head on over to Patreon at patreon.com/MadamMorbid. Thank you so much to all of my supporters, my patrons, to people who watch week after week, for sharing the videos, for hitting like, for subscribing. Thank you for everything you do to support this channel, either financially or moral support, or just being a great fan and making comments. And I love having you here. I will see everybody next time. I do want everybody to know that I am in the middle of moving right now, and it's not just moving from one place to another, it's we have to fix up the new place first before we can move. And it needs some work. So it's going to be a process. It's probably going to last several weeks. So I apologize. I am not going to have as much time to work on videos because of all of this other stuff I'm having to do as well.